So policymakers have to maintain a very keen balance between cutting rates and maintaining them there. And right now, all calls, actually, everyone is calling on. For example, last week, Ken, you said we want CBK to tell us the rates are coming down. The CBR is coming down because the cost of borrowing is still too high as it stands. Listening to IMF and saying, actually, central banks should resist pressure, like your pressure, to prematurely cut the rates. How do you interpret that?
Well, actually, the point she's making is actually amplifying what I tried to make last week, that the central bank needs to look at its core mandate, which is price stability. Right now, inflation is at 5.7%. It's well within the targets of the upper bound of 7.5 and the target of 5%. So by all means, this is a good time to reduce rates. But I think our central bank is also keeping an eye on the exchange rate. And my point was, yes, that could be useful in the sense of controlling imported inflation, but their core mandate is looking at our inflation numbers as it is. There is room to start cutting interest rates because non-performing loans are quite high, 15.5%.
Yes.
Credit to the private sector has slowed down. The economy is slowing down. You can feel there is a cash crunch. So as long as you're within your inflation target, then by all means, you should start cutting rates. You see, the reason the US has not cut its rates, it hasn't met its inflation target. The numbers that came out this week actually went higher.
Yes.
It was a bit sticky. So for them, they still have some time to go before rate cuts. But for Kenya, we arrived at 5% a long time ago. There's no reason to keep punishing businesses with higher interest rates when already your target has been achieved, unless you have other concerns. And I think their concern is on the exchange rate. Now, when you start having multiple objectives, you lose what you're being told, your focus, your independence. You start looking at fiscal policy issues, ability of government to pay debt. So you need to have this exchange rate.
Yes.
So those are the things that I think Christina there is trying to amplify, that you need to focus on your core purpose, which is price stability. And if it's achieved, you need to start reducing interest rates because businesses can't survive in a very high interest rate environment.
All right. Dr. Lenny, do you feel our central bank has been overstepping when it comes to mandate? Have they been veering off more into the fiscal realm other than being on point, as Ken puts it, focusing on price stability?
Central bank is independent, and the independence allows them to just carry out their mandate. I actually tend to agree that we should not move to the fiscal areas because that's actually meant for the treasury. When you talk fiscal discipline, that should be, or fiscal consolidation and issues like that should be with the treasury. Generally, when you look at the two policies, fiscal policy and monetary policy, there is what we call policy coordination, which should actually be existing between the two. So the central bank should adhere to only its part on policy coordination, and the the treasury should also adhere to only its part in policy coordination. Going into another person's mandate or another unit's mandate always bring interference. So I think it's a question of balance. It's a question of being careful to be on your line, run on your line, work as a team, but be a team that understands where they are.
Okay.
So I think moving forward is just ensuring that this coordination is achieved so that we don't have overlapping issues between the central bank and the treasury.
Definitely. And Ken, the duality that we see with the leading global economies and developing economies, when the Fed raises the rates, we are feeling impact here, and now our guys at monetary policy have to really rethink how to cushion the country from such. In this situation where there is a projection, hopefully rate cuts as it goes, is it observing the lead markets, looking at what they're doing with their rates before us? How do you coordinate these two ends of the world, whereas they're impacting each other?
Well, I think there is the theory and there's a practice. What the lady in that video is trying to say is each central bank needs to look at its own economy.
Yes.
Far too often we look at the Fed and what the Fed is doing, but each central bank needs to look at, Central Bank of Kenya needs to look at Kenya. The European Central Bank needs to look at the Eurozone. In fact, they were saying they need to be Euro dependent, not Fed dependent. So that's the theory. The reality is you can't really ignore what's happening across the border because it introduces what are called interest rate differentials. Now, if the Fed, like last year, decided to raise interest rates and our CBK did not raise interest rates like last year, you create a big interest rate differential, which means all the investors start leaving Kenya to go to the US to take advantage of the high yield, because investors are always chasing higher returns. And that's the reason we saw a big capital flight last year. Just investors saying, okay, Kenya is not giving us good rates, we'll go and get in the US. So the practice is, yes, you need to be independent, but you cannot also operate in a vacuum, because when those interest rate differentials are very big, then actually capital flight starts taking place and your currency starts losing value. So it's about finding a sweet spot where you're independent, but you're also in sync in a way with global dynamics.
Policymakers have, a lot to do. Trust you me, it's a lot of work. That's why people age so fast when they get into these offices. Anyway, story for another day. Let's talk fiscal issues, because we were talking here, sometimes we feel the central bank has not, Kenya's central bank, has not been focused on its core mandate. Fiscal issues are actually of concern from IMF's perspective now.